So today's the day we're going to put all the log cabin blocks back together, the straight and the wonky ones, but they're all different sizes. So how do we fit all of these different, what we call orphan blocks back together? There's so many different techniques. I'm just wondering if I should, oh, hey man, it'll be super easy. All you got to do is take all the blocks and cut them down to the same size. Super simple, done, just like that. Well, that makes sense. Rob, no, please, slow down, my friend. You know that will never work. One of those squares is over 20 inches and some of them are about 6 inches. You'll have nothing left of your quilt if you cut them all down to the smallest square. That will never work in this situation. Well, what if you put all the squares back together first? Would that make it any easier? No. If you do that, you'll mess up the whole layout you've already created. That's not a good idea either. Hey, I've got a whole different idea. Why don't we just do this? Why don't we float the squares like they're in a background? We'll just put a different color behind them. Nope, close. However, remember, we just cut them all down once the color's there. It'll be easy, super simple. Background space. Well, black. I just would use black for everything. And I know that black is your favorite color. However, it's not going to work. It's just going to take things out of balance. You have to keep thinking on this, man. Then I've got it. What I'll go ahead and do is match in the fabrics around each square to build out the blocks individually, fit them all back together. I'm going to teach you how. Let's get started. That's right. Thanks for being here, everybody. My name is Rob Appell from Michael Miller Fabrics, and me and my alter egos here are super excited that you are here to have some fun today. And yes, thank you for all the incredible feedback on the Log Cabin 411 and the wonky log cabins. Yes, you are all super inspired, and I'm stoked to put together the rest of this video, which is orphan blocks. Let's expand that concept. Let's say you've been given or somehow created a bunch of different blocks or quilt squares that you want to now put together into a quilt, but they're all of different sizes. So if you look at the design wall, you can see I've got several small ones, some medium ones, and when you all weren't looking, I created a couple of these really large ones just using the 2.5 inch strips. And then of course I had the 1.5 and the 1.5 in the center just to get myself started. So I said I would make some of those bigger blocks, and I did, and I've been playing with it. And yes, there are 3 major approaches to fitting together random blocks of different sizes all back together. Now let's keep in mind the number one most important rule in any of my design work is I'm going to design what I want. I'm going to do what I want. It's my design. So this is the design I want to finish with. There's something very, very similar to this. So the first technique I mentioned was, yes, a lot of times folks will say, just take all of your squares and cut them down to make them all the same size. Now, hear that closely. You have to cut them down, which means you measure all of your squares and you take the measurement of the smallest square you have and you cut all of your larger squares down into small squares. And if you caught the other 2 videos that I did with these squares, you would know that would not do at all what we're after in this project. I want a lot of random different size log cabin blocks. So we are not going to use method number 1, which is cut everything to the same size. That's perfect if you've got everything that's roughly within about 1/2 to 1/4 of an inch and you can shave down or maybe add just a teeny bit. Works great. But for this project, we could also look at the second method of doing it, which would be to take and add in a bunch of background fabrics. So let's put these back on the design wall where they were, here and here, I believe. Now with these, yes, I could come in and add a new fabric, a background fabric to float all of these blocks, but then I'm going to want a little bit of that. I'm going to call it black because that is one of my very favorite background colors to use. It makes everything really sing, or of course bright white does as well. But then I want to put that around the perimeter of each and every block so that then it's easier to fit back together. So what you really do is you're going to add like strips from like say maybe 1/2 of an inch around your very large piece here, and then you might end up going and putting like, gosh, 4-inch strips all the way around your mediums and like 6-inch strips all the way around all 4 sides of the smaller blocks. And so what that's going to really do is it's going to make those small blocks really float into the background. So one of the other ideas, one of my thought processes had, was to take the small blocks, regroup them into a bigger block so there's not so much background showing, but that would then affect my design. I like the way that I've got the little squares and the medium squares and the big squares all over in the project. So we're going to do the third method today together, all of us, and that is we're going to fit each block systematically back into the quilt as we go. So now let's chop this down as it sits on the design wall so you can see exactly, hear exactly what I'm thinking as I go. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to look for major breaks in the layout we already have that could become rows or columns for putting it together in a traditional quilt format. So let's take this section right now, right here pretty close. This is my top corner. So really all I need to do for a second is fill in this space right here, and then this line and all of this should sew together pretty quickly. Now what I can really do with this particular block here is I could sew on one big chunk of this green, and you would pretty much not catch me doing it. But what I really want to do is I want to just make this block a little bit wider. So I'm going to add in some purple and some green. Let me show you that, right? So now as I come down in here onto the work surface, first thing I want to do is just grab a chunk of my purple marble. Okay, and I'm going to now sew this on, and this is one of the blocks that had the foundation, so this is only going to help the matter. And right now I'm just going to sew this on top to bottom so I have plenty. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and an edge guide, and yes, we're just going to literally patch this on here. Real standard. And all of my sewing on the rest of this project will be standard sewing because my wonky blocks have been carved or cut down to become squares. So now we're just putting straight pieces on. Goal is now is to make it so you can't figure out which pieces I had to add in to make up for the distance. So we're going to play a little trickaroo there. Now I want to iron this real quick. And grab myself a ruler, rotary cutter, and we are going to just now go ahead and trim down. If you saw the 411 of the log cabin, you notice I was not promoting that technique for building of the entire block. But now that we're just doing a little bit of add-on, this will be the fastest and easiest way to handle each individual block. So I'm just trimming, making sure that everything is nice. And then remember, we wanted to add on some of the green. So I'm using, I got excited, I forgot to tell you. I'm using the exact same fabrics so that you just don't quite catch that it's an add-on section, okay? So I'm gonna put this one here, I'm gonna add it on. And again, I'll bring it over to the ironing surface and I will press over this piece of fabric. And I'm going to trim this one as well, this side as well here. Using my ruler to keep my hand safe. And now, as I head over to the design wall, better rotate it and get it back into the appropriate orientation. And as I set it there, now I can see that it's too wide for these two blocks. So I'm just going to leave it be for the moment. And I'm going to take these first two little blocks right there, making sure that I keep the seam I'm supposed to. And now we're going to stitch those together. So we're just going to kind of like a puzzle. We're going to build each piece together and add in a little bit, square it down, trim it down, 1/4 inch seam allowance. Pressing after every stitching that I do, every seam that I make. Okay, now as we build this back in here, like this, I can now take these two together, pull them off the wall so that I have the seam that I want to use, right? Which will be this seam across here, and you can see that I've got a little more purple and a little more green than I want, and I really want that purple up against that edge. So what I'm going to do here is just take a moment and slide this over just slightly, not completely, just slightly. I'm going to lay it over just right, using the larger of the two squares on the feed dogs. That's going to help everything sew through nice and evenly. I'm going to go ahead and start at what is my new top edge here. Once I've come to that edge and locked in the threads, I do want to come back over here, and now I'm going to press over into the kind of the smaller block. This will just make the trimming easier on the seam allowances. And you want to make sure you're always using a ruler that's bigger than the work you're using, right? So now I can come down here, and I'm actually looking at this edge up here, watching this edge all the way down here. Oh! Nice, that lined up down there too. You just don't see that every day. So now we're just gonna slide through here one, and you can see there's just a teeny little shavings there. That's what we wanna do. We wanna make sure we're keeping all of our lines running nice and clean. We're gonna go ahead and rotate this. Again, that was already a squared line up there. So we're just gonna go ahead and bring this down in here, double checking everything to make sure it's as accurate as we can be. Looks terrific. And I'm going to go ahead and cut through there. And now, technically, we have made that union that's going to come back up in here and fit just like this. Okay, so that's awesome. If I pull down here, I can see that my big block's still just a little bit bigger than necessary. And I purposefully left a little bit of orange, so I'm going to slide this down. I can see that I do need one piece and some pins. I do need one piece across the top, and you can see because that's an orange bank, I could patchwork those two colors and piece it in, or I can just find another orange that fits all the way across just like that. It's a dark color. I like my darker around the edges. So this is actually one of my favorite ways to patchwork, regardless if they're orphan blocks or not. You saw me build all these squares organically, and it was fun, and I wasn't too concerned about getting them all the right size when they were done because I knew I would probably put them back together this way. And I'm just now using up the scraps that were left over from all the 1.5 and 2.5 inch strips I had made earlier. So it's a very fun, very systematic way to work through, but it kind of is like a puzzle or a challenge or a little bit of a quilting adventure while you go through. It's not all cookie cutter, and I think this is one of the things I like about quilting so much. Something for everybody, different approaches for everybody, and lots to learn out there. Always learning something new. Let's go ahead and press this. Before we put it up onto the wall, we know we're going to trim this last little edge here because this is going to fit up right against the big hot block, hot colors, warm colors block, right? So that sits right there. Here's the seam, so I'm just going to grab it right off the wall while we're working together. And there it goes, just like that. Remember though, now this time, this was all add-on up here. I wanted the seam down here, so I'm gonna make sure that these corners down here match up. I'll trim the rest of that off after I sew these together. Flipping it over, keeping the larger of the two pieces of fabric on my feed dogs. I said that before, but the reason why is those feed dogs are what pull the fabric through, and that makes stitching so much easier. Think about when you're going, or if you ever get to go again through an airport, You got your little suitcase on top of your big suitcase, just pulling along for the ride. That's how I learned that trick. And I can't say I'm missing air travel at all right now. Take another moment, just like I said, always pressing, although I probably should tidy up some of this space. I always want it to look so nice for all of you out there. But really, it's starting to get a little bit in the way. And again, before I lay it back up on the design wall, I will take the time. Now, this is a really long run, so I'm going to utilize as much of the ruler as I can. I did find that seam that I just put on there. That's a nice square seam, so I can trust that. And my edge is up there. Okay, so now we're just going to go ahead and shave that down there. Rotate so we can shave this other edge because we will be joining those other squares over along this side still. Okay, and back on the wall it goes. So you just work your way around the project, one chunk at a time, until it looks like a quilt like we've done before. Now, let's take another second and talk about this here. You can see I've got 2 blocks that are going to fit in this section, no problem. My third block runs past this seam, and I do not want to create a Y seam. So now what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to get all into this block and these. So what I will probably end up doing is filling in a space here, might even build in a little space between each of these blocks as I go to make up the difference for what's going to happen here and here. So right now I'm going to leave this section alone. That'll be what I finish out. I'm going to come back over here, and now I'm going to focus in on this section. And I really want you to notice this part right here. This is really important because we don't want one chunk. It would be very easy to drop a big wide 2.5-inch strip right here and maybe a little fill in there. But again, that's going to look odd or obvious that you were doing some patching of your patchwork. So what I really want us to do again is we're going to do another split the difference. We're going to move this square over here in the middle like that. I'm hoping you can now see okay. And then I'll add in some of my darker orange on this side and some of my medium orange on this side so that that fills in that space. And I'll do those by adding, again, wide strips in and cutting them down, fitting these two together and kind of building all of this in as we go. Now, each step, as you can see, takes a little bit of time in engineering. So if you will be patient with me, I'll go into caffeinated mode here real quick and blast together all of these squares so that you can see that it really comes together, and we'll talk about just a little bit more of those layout techniques. I may just find a pitfall that I need to describe, but I won't know until I get there, and there's no way you want to watch the next couple of hours, and that's what this really should take. And hey, enjoy the sewing process. This is what we do here. So I'll see you at the end of the video, which will be just in a few moments from now, with the finished product, and I show you how all of these pieces go back together when you're adding and building, adding and building. I'm sure we'll have something else to say in just a moment. Be right back, folks. And that's right. Didn't even take as long as I expected. Check it out in its glory. There it is. I hope you can see all of it behind the table there. All of the squares are back together. You can see I've got a little last trim on the last little piece I just put in. But just like I said, it was super easy, super simple to get all of our awesome blocks back together with that method. And again, if you didn't see the other videos, I'm just going to encourage you to go back and check them out. I think they're fantastic. All of the fans are loving them. The Log Cabin 411 is a really cool history of the log cabin block. And then I walk you through the basic steps of building a nice straight pieced block and some really easy and cool math so that you can go on and design a lot of your own log cabin blocks. Super simple. Or if you're more of the free piecer, the following week I came back with what I called the wonky log cabins. Those made these super fun blocks like this where they're not perfect and they're super easy. Teach a little bit about foundation in there, so check out that video. And then again today I just wanted to cover 3 of the really easy common ways to put together orphan blocks or random blocks that are all being encouraged to be put back into a quilt. So of course, we could always square them down to the smallest block, but if you have more than about a half of an inch difference, that can be a real problem because you lose so much of your design and so much of the work you've done. You could always then float all your blocks into a background color, like another one of my suggestions I had, but these small blocks would have had a lot of background in order to make enough space to meet the big blocks. So again, wasn't really the design I was going for, and I didn't want to introduce a new color because I just love the way these colors were reading, and these were the Michael Miller basics. You found Hash Dot in here, and Coco, and Cotton Couture, and Marble, and just fantastic. I'll have all of the colors listed in the description below for you. I had several folks ask over the last few videos. And then again, this was a super simple way of sliding in a piece or two, a new strip from the scraps. You probably can't even tell where they ended up. It's just a really easy and organic way of doing it, but you do have to do one block at a time and try not to paint yourself into any of those corners we call Y seams. Didn't happen in this square. Really easy, real fun to do. So anyways, super excited about the way that this quilt turned out. Super excited that I could share all of this information with all of you. We will be back very soon with another terrific video for everybody right here at Making It Fun. We'll see you real soon. Thanks for being here. Wow, you are still there. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of the video. I know, I get a little long-winded sometimes. But if you did enjoy today's video, make sure you check out a few of the other ones we've created. I think they're terrific. And of course, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the little bell to be notified. I don't want you to miss a moment of the fun. Stay safe and happy sewing.